So I will say, welcome to Doxacon Seattle again. Welcome to this session. This session is Killing Baby Hitler with Tim Brown. In case anyone is new, showing up for this session as the first one, you can make comments in the chat window, push the little chat thing down there below. Keep it appropriate and on topic. If you have questions that you'd like Tim to answer, they will be answered at the end, but you can click the little Q&A button down at the bottom and type your question in there, and then he'll look at them at the end to give you answers. You can also upvote questions in that might be in there if you see them, if you think that, oh, this is a question that I was thinking of also, you can upvote that. If you're having problems, use the raise hand feature or chat or Discord, which we have our Discord server going on. And now I would like to welcome our presenter, Tim Brown. Thank you for being here, and I will hand the presentation over to you.
Hello. At this point, I do the traditional thing of tapping my mic and going, is this thing on? Is this thing on? So welcome to the first presentation today by someone who has no reverend or father or formal title of any kind. So having established my complete lack of credentials, let's proceed. I will provide a disclaimer up front that no, in fact, I am not going to instruct you in ways to kill baby Hitler. That's not the point of the presentation. Just wanted to make that clear. I've been enjoying most of the presentation so far. I hope you have, and hope this one does not disappoint, especially with the carefully crafted clickbait label that I gave it. While I've read or watched in part or entirely the stories and shows I'll be talking about, a subgenre like time travel is huge. Anything we talk about here is just a small sample of what's out there. I'm sure many of you will have examples I won't mention. Feel free to bring those up in the questions and discussion or in the chat during and after the presentation. I also don't present myself as an expert scholar on these things, just an aficionado, not laying down the one true interpretation, hopefully just offering some thoughts that will spark some interest and maybe some exploration into new perspectives on this aspect of science fiction and fantasy and how creators play with conceptions and perceptions of time. I want to start by looking at time travel stories as a kind of morality tale, not unlike the old fairy tales and fables, which openly or subtly operated as lessons in how to behave or how to understand one's place in the universe. There are a couple of different kinds of time travel stories according to the purpose of the creator, and with that in mind, I'll take a quick look at a few of these stories to see how each of them deals with the issues of acting across time and what lessons they might offer us. I'll close my presentation by expanding a little on what I think some of these time travel stories tell us, openly or subtly, about our place in the universe and the consequences of our behavior. And there will be time for discussions and questions afterward. And of course, there's the Discord channel to post in at any time. But I will be talking about killing baby Hitler before we're done. You can find lots of discussions about the meaning of fairy tales and fables, from Tolkien and Lewis to Freud, Jung, Bettelheim, and Campbell, just to name a few of the more prominent. Depending on your perspective and mindset, you can find all sorts of interpretations. But all of these interpretations do go beyond the simple facts of the story, as it were, turning characters and events into symbols and messages that work subconsciously or as subtext. Since these stories are generally aimed at children, supposedly, it's commonly accepted that these stories are meant as more than just stories. They're instructions in proper behavior or nobility or the dangers of real life or what values one should aspire to. By symbol and example, we almost always see virtue rewarded and bad behavior punished, at least by the end of these stories. Hansel and Gretel get themselves into mortal danger by falling for a trap designed to lure them in with easy satisfaction of their needs. Cinderella is finally enabled to escape her abusive situation, which she has endured with patience and long suffering. And her wicked stepfamily reaps dire rewards for their arrogance and cruelty, depending on which version you're dealing with. The Three Little Pigs show what can happen when you build for ease and convenience rather than preparing for future difficulties. Many stories, such as Rumpelstiltskin, Puss in Boots, several of these stories out of the Arabian Nights, demonstrate the value of cleverness to overcome raw power, a favorite theme across many cultures. Obviously, there's a lot more to each story, more symbols and meanings that can be read in them, but these themes keep recurring, whether by their own merits, unexpected allies, often recruited by the protagonist's kindness. Noble people are shown overcoming evil enemies and bad circumstances. It's interesting to note how many of these bad circumstances are triggered by a poor choice made by the protagonist or an unfortunate action on their part, such as selling the family's one cow for a handful of supposedly magic beans, or pricking a finger on a poisoned spinning wheel. Sometimes the protagonist has received warnings of these bad behaviors. Sometimes they're just unexpected. Speculative fiction, science fiction, and fantasy, to me, lie well within the tradition of fairy tales. Obviously, many fantasy stories use the same tropes that are common among fairy tales: mysterious forests, talking animals, curses, and spells. Science fiction replaces many of those old but still meaningful tropes with technological substitutes: mysterious asteroid fields, animal-like aliens, space engineering, and, well, technobabble. The purpose, or a purpose, is the same in both genres: to take us out of reality into an imaginary world where we can express and explore the same themes of danger, opportunity, morality, and identity. Perhaps the best-known modern expression of how speculative fiction occupies the same space as fairy tales is the line, "A long, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away." Blatant and deliberate modern version of "Once Upon a Time." Setting the story in an unreal world allows the creator to manipulate how the world works, and it also puts the moral, psychological, and cultural themes of each story at a distance from real life. Really, it's kind of the whole purpose behind Doxacon, to explore and examine how science fiction and fantasy relate to real life issues, reflecting moral and spiritual insights to be found in all these unreal worlds. Now, it has seemed to me that there's generally two kinds of time travel stories: predictions, which usually include warnings, and what I call do-overs. Wait, make that three kinds of time travel stories: predictions, do-overs, and adventures. And after all, nobody expects the Spanish Time Inquisition. Adventures are stories where time travel is just a vehicle for a story, where the protagonists arrive at a certain time, usually in the past, sometimes in the future, and have an adventure. Washington Irving's story of Rip Van Winkle is a kind of time travel story in this category. The title character, by sleeping for 20 years, effectively jumps from one time to another and has to deal with the differences that have developed around him. Mark Twain's A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court is one of the earliest popular examples of a time travel novel in which the protagonist finds himself in the past. The mechanism of time travel isn't typically explained, or is even ignored in many of these kind of stories. Twain wasn't really writing science fiction so much as a satire of medieval and his contemporary society. H.G. Wells' The Time Machine uses time travel literally as a vehicle for no other purpose than to get to the adventure, and then to return. Although that story does fall into the realm of predictions. Some of the stories which involve chasing the villain through time, which I'll talk more about later, also come down to really just the adventure type. An example is Time After Time, which is both a film and a novel, where a fictional H.G. Wells uses his time machine to chase Jack the Ripper into modern America. But really, other than the culture shock that both Jack the Ripper and H.G. Wells encounter, time travel doesn't really figure into the story per se. Now, what I'm calling prediction type time travel stories are the ones that are basically just descriptions of typically the future, of what the future is like, to explore potential developments of contemporary trends or technology, and at least as often as a warning of a bad future, or sometimes cheering for a good future, falling into dystopian and utopian genres. Excuse me. In Wells' The Time Machine, the protagonist travels into the far distant future and finds things in a very sorry state. He has a frightful adventure, and eventually, and I'm sorry to spoil the story, but he does escape back into his own time. Prediction-type time travel stories are often thinly disguised commentary on contemporary society, though some do come across as just a variety of gee-whiz sci-fi fluff. But most time travel stories, and the ones I want to talk about the most, fall into what I call the do-over category, where people in the story travel in time and change the course of history on a small or large scale. There are a bunch of variations, of course. These stories can be comedic, dramatic, romantic, action, adventure, whatever you like. Sometimes the protagonists are accidental time travelers, such as in the original Star Trek series, the episode City on the Edge of Forever has Dr. McCoy accidentally sent to America in 1930, and then Kirk and Spock then go to rescue him. In Eric Flint's novel 1632, an entire West Virginia town is transported from America in the year 2000 into the middle of Europe in, well, 1632. That's the title. But one of the most popular examples of accidental time travel, and one reason I came up with the name of the do-over category, is the film Groundhog Day, written and directed by Harold Ramis, starring Bill Murray. The protagonist of this film is suddenly trapped in a time loop where he wakes up the same day every morning, reliving the same 24 hours over and over again. Once he realizes the situation and realizes that there's no apparent consequences of his behavior, since each morning is a complete rewind, he explores some of the unique possibilities this offers him. Consider, and this is something the film kind of puts forward as the driving question of the film. What would you do if you could have a day where you could do anything you wanted to anyone you want, knowing that you would wake up the next morning, there would be no punishment, no ill effects, nobody would remember what you did, there would be no accountability, everything would just reset? What would you do? Well, hedonism, which is just doing stuff for fun, is one phase the guy goes through. And this lasts a while, and then it becomes tiring. And he drifts into despair because ultimately, yes, this is just pointless because there's no inherent progress. There's no change. It just all resets and nothing matters. Finally, after doing this for some time, For the sake of human contact and for love, he resolves to improve himself socially and morally, doing good deeds, trying to make a real connection, and ultimately becoming a better person. And in the process, finally breaks the curse. Groundhog Day is a fairly straightforward morality tale to a significant extent, showing not only the importance of human connection and love, but dramatizing how goodness can be a way to break out of the perceived trap of mundane existence. Our place in the universe is not to simply amuse ourselves, nor to destroy ourselves, but to connect with other human beings in positive ways. It's very much a modern fable. It's worth noting that Groundhog Day kind of time trap has been employed to good effect in a number of science fiction shows. Stargate SG-1 had one I particularly enjoyed, the episode called Window of Opportunity, where the unintellectual Colonel O'Neill and the alien warrior Teal'c find themselves trapped in a similar time loop. Now, it's played mostly for comedic effect, including a scene of O'Neill using the interstellar gateway for golfing practice. The two eventually teach themselves the alien language so that they finally can break the time cycle. So the episode's a lot of fun, but it can still be seen as carrying the message that self-improvement is the key to breaking out of a stale, maddening, repetitive existence. But what I really want to look at, to narrow the focus a little more, is time travel stories that aren't closed time loops, but are specifically stories where there are measurable and noticeable consequences for the character's actions. I still put them in the do-over category because these stories involve characters almost universally. These are characters going into the past to change history, sometimes on a minor or even trivial scale, but always causing a do-over of history, where the character's actions change what happens in their own past. Going again to big ticket films. Probably the two most famous of these would be Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure and Back to the Future. Both of these multi-movie franchises are comedies, and these are very much in the theme of do-over time travel. These sets of films both feature very active time hopping, both into the past and future, in jumps that span anything from minutes to centuries. They both deal with the consequences of past actions affecting future events, which in turn require more time travel intervention to make sure the desired future is the final result. Often, especially in Back to the Future, this means multiple jumps, where protagonists cross their own paths, sometimes interacting with previous or future versions of themselves, altering their own past in order to fix their own history. It's played very effectively in both films. Excellent Adventure kicks off with George Carlin appearing from the future in an intervention to fix his own future history. Bill and Ted's Band is key to a future of peace and prosperity for all, but some things happen to disrupt that future. Through much comedic bumbling, everything does turn out well in the end. This is a very light-hearted romp, and there's really little exploration of unintended consequences. Back to the Future, on the other hand, has a lot more about unintended consequences. In that one, the first time jump occurs when Marty McFly is fleeing a murder scene. Now, all three of the Back to the Future films deal with consequences of time-traveling actions, which result in surprising changes to the present and future of each of the main characters. in some cases being a matter of life and death. Now, these kind of comedies are great fun. I love both the films. I love all the films in each franchise. And they do carry, again, similar moral messages, sometimes subtly, sometimes openly, but messages about how one should behave to other human beings, i.e. to treat them with respect and kindness, but also being willing to face down bullies and threats with courage and restraint. I mean, and of course, you have Bill and Ted's slogan, be excellent to each other, which isn't a bad modern slang paraphrasing of the golden rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. What is hateful to you, do not do unto others. There's several versions of this across many cultures. The second part of their message, and party on, dude, is again a slangy echo of a message you commonly hear in more serious moral teachings about appreciating and celebrating the things that are good in life. So even in the midst of this, screwball comedy, you get the you get a taste of the moral lessons behind a lot of the old fairy tales and fables in a somewhat modern vernacular form. Of course, there are other shows, movies and television that use the trope of jumping through time to fix history. And it's often to counter some time-traveling villain. The TV series Quantum Leap is a pretty well-known example. Another one that I came across, yes, indeed, Love and Do What You Will. That's not far from, party on, dude. Anyway, another one I came across recently is a TV series called Timeless, which not only has the time travel, chasing the time traveling villain as he tries to mess up the future by changing the past. But it brings a problem of unintended consequences to an immediate personal level, in that the daughter of the main protagonist, when that episode, when that adventure or mission is over, they come back to present day and her daughter has been erased from history, which remains a significant plot point throughout the entire series. Star Trek, I already referred to the episode City on the Edge of Forever. Definitely not a comedy. It's a almost it has heavy tragic notes. A deranged Dr. McCoy disappears into the past, 1930 New York City to be specific, and suddenly the universe of Star Trek is completely changed so that the Starship Enterprise doesn't exist. Kirk and Spock are left there looking at this gateway through time going, what happened? So they go after him to rescue him. And they're being careful not to change history any further. And hopefully they're going to be able to undo whatever McCoy did in his deranged state. They come upon a charity worker and peace activist. And they discover that she's the key element in the altered history they're trying to correct. It turns out that her activities keep America from rearming in time to fight the Nazis properly, so that Hitler, told you I'd get around to Hitler, wins World War II. Kirk, who is kind of falling in love with this activist, has to stop McCoy from saving her life in a traffic accident to get their own history back on course. And finally, the Starfleet officers return to their own time to find everything back to normal. This episode is probably the core inspiration behind this little talk. In that it shows, the unintended consequences of time travel, but also some of the moral dilemmas inherent in trying to fix history. I'll circle around back to that shortly. I've talked a lot about films and TV shows, but of course there are novels and novel series and short stories and everything else. In the interest of time, wink, wink, I'll just mention one. That again, I kind of going on my own personal experience, but it's well known and critically acclaimed, is Guns of the South by Turtle Dove, who has gone on to become, one of the, if not the acknowledged master of alternate history, which is one of my favorite science fiction genres, and is a close cousin to time travel in itself. But anyway, in this novel, radical South African racists transport modern automatic rifles back through time. So they give them to Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia, who use them to defeat the Union Army and win the American Civil War, so that the slaveholding Confederacy survives as an independent country. This is their plan. And, it works to that extent, so that the South is its own country, the North is its own country, and things go from there. But in a twist the South Africans fail to foresee, Lee figures out what their real scheme was, in that it wasn't so much to benefit the South or Americans at all, but to make their apartheid South Africa, less of an isolated country in their own time. And they're just using Lee and the Confederates for their own purpose. So he figures out what they're doing, how they've deceived him. And in the novel, Lee goes on to respond to this deception and manipulation by spurring the Confederacy to embark on its own course of emancipation. Which again, in a way, shows you this unintended consequences, this time working against the bad guys who were trying to fix history to fit their own preferences. Although in this case, in another variation, the villains aren't stopped by heroic time travelers from our day so much as by the very people that they're trying to exploit to change history to their favor. If you're a history geek or a Civil War geek, I loved this novel for those reasons. But it's a great example of things don't work the way you expect them to. And that's the problem with so many time travel stories. And really, it's kind of the point of a lot of time travel stories, is things don't always work the way you want them to. And so it's in this sort of time traveling alternate history subgenre where I come up, where I got my clickbait title. Because it's common trope or even cliche about how, well, if I had a time machine, one of the best things I could do is be a hero to the world by going back and killing Hitler before he takes power and leads the Nazis to start World War II and do all the horrible things they did. Sounds great, Obviously the Nazis are pretty much the definitive bad guys of history, the standard to which all other bad guys are measured nowadays. So if you do get hold of a time machine and want to use it for good purposes, this is an obvious move, right? Right. Well, again, the problem with so many of the best time travel stories is that you can't predict what's going to happen when you change things. Maybe things will work to your benefit, like for Marty McFly, whose living situation changed for the better after his adventures in Back to the Future. Although it is worth noting that he didn't start on that adventure for the sake of making his parents better people. In fact, I might even submit that this extra benefit is made dramatically possible precisely because he didn't set out for his own gain. He wasn't saying, I can make things better by exercising this unique ability. For a lot of the first movies, his motivation was, I want to go home, because he suddenly finds himself transported from 1985 to 1955 and has to figure out how to get back home to 1985. So he's actually acting out of, you might see it as selfish, but it's not self-aggrandizing motivations. In Guns of the South, things eventually turn out badly for these South African radicals, who end up being branded as criminals by the very people they are claiming and actually helping. History is so full of strange events, accidents, and coincidences as it is. Active intervention in the past is almost certainly impossible to control. Even in so obvious a case as Adolf Hitler, there are potential perils. Hitler, as influential as he was, did not act alone. There are others who would have at least tried to take his place and do very similar things. One of them might have been more competent, leading Nazi Germany on a less self-destructive course, perhaps even surviving the war. And there's at least one novel that has been published using that very idea. Perhaps no party would be able to unify Germany, so it remains unable to form a coherent, stable government, leaving only Poland and perhaps Britain as a counterweight to the growing power of Stalin's Soviet Union. It's possible that Germany would find its way to stability and prosperity without Hitler's madness. It's just impossible to know. There are so many variables to consider. The effects of the Great Depression, the lingering resentment over the Versailles Treaty, the influence of communists and militarists, both prominent in the internal struggles of Germany in the 20s and 30s. But even on a more personal level, on a micro level, without even getting, lost among the macro big influence on history questions, there are the moral dilemmas of intervention to change history. City on the Edge of the Forever, I picked as an example, as an illustration of how good intent can work towards a bad result. Because we live in a fallen world. Sometimes what is meant for good can end in evil, whether we intend that or even foresee it in any way. The way to fix history in that episode is to allow an innocent woman to die, even when it's easily possible to save her. To coin a common vernacular phrase, that's messed up. But that's exactly the kind of choice soldiers, police, and ordinary citizens have to face in critical situations. Yeah, as Bev pointed out, the road to hell is paved. We all know the rest of that with good intentions. Um, and there are times when what looks like the compassionate, kind choice is the wrong choice. And of course, there are times when there is no choice that seems good, but only those that hurt someone or some number of people. Um, and the time travel stories I appreciate the most for depth are the ones that take on these kind of questions, these kind of issues. Is how do you deal with that choice? What's the consequence of doing what you think is right, let alone what feels good? Um, you know, um, what do you do when what seems like a good idea turns out badly? And with the ability to pop back and forth in history where you can see the long-term results of your intervention, how easy it is to go back, if you do something and it turns out badly, how easy is it to go back and refix or unfix what you did? If you go back and kill baby Hitler, but it turns out badly, and you go back and stop yourself from killing baby Hitler, you still have Adolf Hitler doing all the bad things he did, so that's turning out badly. And pretty soon your head explodes. Um, and even on a further micro level, how good is it to kill a baby anyway? Um, you know, talk about murder of an innocent. You know, you go back in time to kill Hitler before he takes power, means that you're going back with a deliberate intent to execute a person who has not yet committed a capital crime. Is that being a hero? Mm, um, uh, yeah. Uh, I was intrigued by something I came across in the casual web crawling I laughingly call research. Apparently, there is at least one published story out there based on the idea of someone goes back in time to stop Hitler, but not by killing him. What they do is they go and buy his paintings because he tried to be an artist, I think, in Austria at some point before starting into politics and failed at that. But by going back and buying his paintings, it's a work of charity. No one is harmed. But Hitler makes at least a modest success at being an artist, so he never gets into power politics. I think that's a fascinating story. I hope to hunt it down someday. But it still leaves, of course, the big question of what happens in Germany without Hitler. So, these time travel stories offer us a certain view of our own place in the world, which is a world of great confusion and mystery, a very fallen and flawed world where good can be evil and evil, doing bad things might be the good thing to do. And it's a very messy situation. And perhaps these stories offer, like fairy tales, some sly advice on how we might guide our own behavior. Common decency, a sense of honor, and a strong dose of humility seem to be the way to go when dealing with time travel. Because, like a box of chocolates, you never really know what you're going to get. So I hope this kind of, opens some questions you can use in your own experience and in the future when you look at time travel stories. And, again, we're all traveling through time, in fact, at the standard rate of 60 minutes an hour. So thank you for putting up with my ramblings. In this, we do have some time, a fair amount of time for question and discussion. My voice is starting to crack. Oh no! The next session is not until noon here, and it is the blessed session called lunchtime. And please feel free to chat things up in Discord now and in the future. So let me put my document away. And let's look at the question we had. Okay. Based on current Orthodox Christian understanding, would time travel be considered a technology that could not be morally used? This is from Emanuel Schultz. Well, I'm no theologian, obviously, but that is an open question. And that is why I mentioned the dose of humility, because the problem, the basic problem of time travel intervention is precisely, do we get to play God? How much do we trust in providence? It would be interesting to hear some of the more trained people discussing this question, even if it is theoretical. Robert K. asks, what about the do-over culture of video games? The repetition of characters dying and reviving and doing the same task over and over until the character succeeds and moves on to the next task. How does that impact our view of our place in the world and the consequences of moral actions? That's a fascinating question, one that I had not arrived at myself, but it is an interesting point. Excuse me. I spend way too much time in the MMO, Old Republic, Star Wars online. And one of the features of that game is in many places, your character in the story can choose to do a light side or a dark side action. And, there's some debate over, how valid some of those choices are. But it is interesting because, for the sake of exploring stories, I've taken one character through and done all the light side, and another character and done all the dark side, and et cetera, et cetera. And that's an interesting exploration. As far as the repetition, I'm not sure how to respond to that at the moment, but it is an interesting question. But the whole idea of playing these games that offer moral choices, whether they're measured in game terms or not. But, do you shoot the prisoners or capture them or set them free? If you don't beat them this time, you just pop in again and beat them the next time, and you just, pop back to the med center and respawn and do it. And one does have to wonder what effect that is having on people's attitudes towards moral choices, if you can always just redo them or not. Into the breach. I'll have to look at that one. And just how serious are the consequences of moral choices in games? And again, how does that affect our view of moral choices? Having gone through, I get almost the exact same story, whether I choose the dark side or the light side in the Star Wars MMO. Now, there are places where there are major differences, but mostly it's the same story. How is that affecting my own moral judgment in real life? Elizabeth Turbo gives me, do you think that most ways that time travel stories could be done have already been done? Is it possible to write something new and fresh about time traveling? uh, well, you could ask that about any genre, is my initial knee-jerk reaction. And I think because there are whole batches of time travel stories that I didn't touch on. Madeleine L'Engle's Wrinkle in Time touches on time travel. And you start, I barely mentioned it, but alternate history, like I said, is a close cousin of time travel. And there are lots of ways that's been done. And I haven't even talked, partially because I don't know any at all very well myself, but fantasy versions of time travel. So I wouldn't be surprised if there are new ways to do this, but I would suspect that it would depend on how much you've already seen. So let's see. I want to touch on what's this. Emmanuel technology in the looking over at chat here. Technology morality, my intuition from a Roman Catholic perspective would be just like any technology that we do not understand the implications of. We can't make a reasonable moral choice, so we should avoid it until the consequences can be evaluated. Unless time travel consequences could be measured and understood, at least generally, it would be far too dangerous. It's like the standard trope of, I've seen for years now, where, they got so, it's phrased something like, they got so wrapped up on whether they could do it, they never stopped to ask whether they should do it. And it's like, yes, that would be the proper moral thing to do, perhaps. But since when have people actually behaved that way? There's so many examples of, well, we can do this, so we're gonna do it because we think it will benefit us in some way, whether it's a weapon of war, or a method of harvesting resources, or a method of organizing society, all sorts of things of that kind. And as Robert mentioned, we can't know the full consequences of any action even now, which actually reminds me of a point that I never got around to writing in my script. Which is, you get all these stories and people and theories and discussions about what if you could go back in the past and change something and, make the world better, whether it's killing baby Hitler or buying his paintings or, saving Abraham Lincoln or whatever. But people never seem to discuss the fact that, okay, you talk about going back and changing maybe little things about the past, in your own past or in other people's past or the distant past, helping somebody, to do a thing better or do a better thing. And you see a lot less discussion among, in the same way about, well, if you had a time machine and you're so head up that you could go back and you could fix all these little things with small actions that would have great consequences today, why aren't you applying that principle to your life now by doing small, good, kind, constructive actions in the secure faith that they will have positive ramifications in the long term? which I thought was a very interesting point when I saw it. So, and
all right. Looks like it's time to begin our next session, which is lunch.
lunch.
So, and move the conversation over to Discord. So we don't have anything on Zoom for the next until 1 o'clock. And but we will be on Discord, so be sure to stay there. Also, if you look at the landing page for the schedule, pay close attention to those beginning times and the people. The ending times are mostly theoretical. They have a lot to do with time travel, I think. So you don't have to pay too much attention to those, but we hope you've been enjoying the day so far, and we will see you afterwards. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you all very much.